Welcome back to Our Issues Milwaukee. I'm your host, Andrea Williams. Our focus today has been on the city of Milwaukee. Our last guest was 10th District Alderman and newly elected Common Council President Michael Murphy. And I'm now being joined by a man who has written several books on the history of Milwaukee. Paul Geenen is the author of Milwaukee's Bronzeville, 1900 to 1950, Schuster's and Gimbel's, Milwaukee's beloved department stores, and Sherman Park, A Legacy of Diversity in Milwaukee. Paul Geenen is with us now. It is my pleasure to have you here.
Well, thank you for having me, Andrea.
And you actually have written a book entitled Civil Rights Activism in Milwaukee, Southside Struggles in the 60s and 70s. That's your latest. Tell us about it.
Well, I got the idea from the book by a friend of mine called up and said that everybody thinks that we're racist on the South Side because in 1967, people from the South Side met Father Grappi and the NAACP Youth Council. 13,000 people met them with bricks and epitaphs. And she asked if I would look at what are some of the other stories, what else was going on in the South Side during this time period.
Very interesting, because I do think it's important, because when we look at the history specifically on the South Side, that does come to mind. You're reminded of Father Grappi, Vel Phillips, and members of the NAACP Youth Council marching for open housing, and a lot of those riots that kind of went along with that. So we fast forward to today, and you've written this book that has had an impact already, because it brings some pride to people knowing that there were some great things that happened on the city's South Side.
Well, the South Side had a lot of problems, a lot of prejudice during this period of our city. The whole city was highly segregated, and the school system was doing intact busing. So there's all kinds of bad things that were going along or happening. But at the same time, for example, there was this Alverno College, which was situated on the South Side, and they were very active in getting the word out that there's a big world out there, and in educating people in the community about some of the things that they should be thinking about.
Absolutely. We're going to talk more about Alverno College and the role they played in the civil rights movement. But first, you had mentioned that the South Side was very segregated and there was a lot of prejudice. But when we are looking at Milwaukee today, we still see the numbers that say that we are still the most segregated city in the country, one of the most segregated cities in the country. And then also we hear the term hyper-segregated used a lot. So in your opinion, where are we today versus where we were when you knew that it was segregated for sure?
Well, I do believe that things are better today than they were then, just because things are so bad.
Blatant, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, but today we still suffer from segregation because of the transportation issue, because of lack of jobs or lack of transportation to jobs. A lot of the jobs have moved out of the city, and that has made it very difficult for African Americans to get employment and sustain their families and kind of have a normal life.
And let's talk about those things that helped shape the history of the South Side. You mentioned Alverno College. It was right there on South 43rd, and they offered, and still is, they offered programs on race relations, and there were two young ladies who really stood out and made a difference. Tell us more about them.
Well, one young lady was Maria Varela, and the other one was Peggy Rosga. Alverno put on this one-day education event called Racism, Reason, Response, and that was a life-shaping, that had a life-shaping impact, particularly on Peggy Rosga. Maria Varela went to the South. She designed training programs to teach African Americans how to pass the voting tests, because during that period you had to you had to answer a series of questions.
Right.
And Peggy Rosga went to the South also, and she was actually going out and recruiting. We call it voter registration today, where you go door to door and recruiting people to come down to the polls on the 2 days that they were registering voters. So both young women, it was very dangerous. Both women had incidents where high-speed chases at night with people chasing them, ducking behind semis to lose their pursuers. Peggy Rosga was almost physically threatened. So this was very, very dangerous work, and it had a tremendous impact on their lives. It changed their lives.
I can imagine. I can only imagine. And that was in 1964 when Alverno had the Racism Reason Response, which was a day when students, faculty, and members of the surrounding Southside community stopped what they were doing and focused on that one issue.
Right,
Very interesting. Then I don't know how many people actually know, but Milwaukee's former mayor was head of the Alverno Office of Development. Talk
That's
about
right.
that.
Well, Frank Zeidler, he decided not to run for mayor anymore, and then Henry Meyer was the mayor that ran after that. And Frank Zeidler was a socialist mayor, and after he was no longer in the mayor's office, he couldn't find work, and so he was hired at Alverno College. He was development director, and he also taught courses there, which particularly about city planning and the best way to design, what a city should look like.
Very interesting. And then you even have in this book where Jesse Jackson spoke at Alverno's 1968 Summer Institute on the pros and cons of open housing. So a lot going on those days.
That's right. That's right. At first, Jesse Jackson didn't want to come because at that time the housing marches were going on, and but he did decide to come, and he was a very effective speaker. It's interesting, they also had someone who was speaking about the pros of segregated housing, and I'm not sure how that went. I think Jesse Jackson did a better job.
Well, there's quite a bit of history on Wisconsin migrant workers in this book as well, and we all know that they have collectively played a huge role in the development of this particular state. So if you could tell us more about the story of how they too fought for adequate pay, housing, and then safe and sanitary working conditions.
Yeah, this is a fascinating story. Zeus Alice, his family grew up in Watoma, and they had their roots in Crystal City, Texas, and they were part of the whole migrant worker cycle. And Jesus started off as a daycare worker, working for young, taking care of the health of young children of migrant workers, and he became really, really concerned about the stories he heard. So, make a long story short, he started he did a march from Watoma to Madison that coincided with a march that Cesar Chavez was doing in California, and got national press on the Wisconsin march. And the workers said, "We want to have a union." So Jesus, they were a little naive. They said, "Yeah, let's start a union," and they found out that it was much more difficult than they had imagined at the front end. Wisconsin and Hawaii were the only two states who had a labor relation board. So what that meant was that if you got enough signatures of workers who wanted to be a member of a union, you could go to the board, and then they could order an election. Now the problem with that was that because these are migrant workers, so time was of the essence because they weren't going to hang around. So what the employers would do is they would kind of drag things out. And so often they won the battle but lost the war. For example, the cucumber strike, where they went and struck, they got approval to have a union, they had a vote, and by the time all this happened, the employer said, well, next year we're going to have mechanical pickers, and 700 migrant workers lost their job.
Interesting.
And a lot of those people moved to Milwaukee.
I mean, you have it all right here in this book. And again, the title is Civil Rights Activism in Milwaukee, Southside Struggles in the 60s and 70s. And before we run out of time, your bio describes you not only as an author, but also an entrepreneur and a community activist. So you know a little bit about activism yourself. What are some of the things that you're fighting for today?
Well, today I'm the Milwaukee chapter lead for Organizing for Action. So we're fighting for comprehensive immigration reform, for universal background checks on all gun purchases, for addressing, starting the conversation on addressing climate change, and for making the Affordable Care Act a success.
All right, so thumbs in a lot of pies, and those are very important issues from all the way the beginning to the end. And I want to talk about your other books that you've written, because
Sure.
I think that people can totally appreciate them, and it's definitely something, if they have a knack for history, they want to add it to their collection. You wrote Milwaukee's Bronzeville, 1900 to 1950. What
Right.
made you interested in that?
Well, at the time I was volunteering at a church that's located in the central city, and I was driving these wonderful elderly African-American women to what they call the adult center, kind of like a place where they socialize. And I heard these wonderful stories of growing up. So I decided that those stories had to be recorded. So I started interviewing people, and what I would do is I would go to their homes, and they would pull out from their dining room drawers these photo albums, and then I would scan them, and that's kind of a lengthy process. So while I was doing that, I would interview them and get the stories, and that's where the idea for the book came from.
I love that. And you also were able to compile your tribute, so to speak, to those who worked for so many years at Schuster's and Gimbel's. And also, you grew up in Sherman Park, so you wrote the book, Sherman Park, A Legacy of Diversity in Milwaukee. So a whole lot that you have added to opening up the doors for people to better understand what went on here maybe before their time. I want to mention that you have several book signings and events that are coming up. Wednesday, March 13th,
right.
You'll be at the Clement Manor Retirement Community in Greenfield.
Yep.
And then Thursday, you'll have People's Books Cooperative on East Center Street. And
Right.
is that the 14th? That you'll be there on March 14th?
I believe so, right.
Okay, then Saturday, March 15th at 1 p.m., Barnes & Noble's Bayshore Mall in Glendale. Wednesday, April 9th from noon to 1, you'll be at the Waukesha County Museum. And then Monday, October 6th, which is further down the calendar, but 7 p.m. at Bayview Historical Society. So you're making your way all over the city to make people aware of the history that lies right here in where we live.
Okay.
I think that's awesome. So thank you so much for stopping by and giving us a, so to speak, sneak peek of what you've written. The title of the book, again, Civil Rights Activism in Milwaukee, Southside Struggles in the 60s and 70s.
Thank you for
again.
having me.
It's my pleasure. Paul Geenen is the author of the new book, and you can get it in the bookstore near you. And that is going to do it for today's show. A huge thank you to both of my guests. And I am your host, of course, Andrea Williams. I thank you for watching, and we hope you join us again next week as we take another look at Our Issues Milwaukee. Have a great day.